Hello? Is this, yes, it's working. Great. Thank you all for coming out today for our 2 days of thesis review. I appreciate you all coming today through the sleet and rain and the delayed opening of University of Maryland. So before we get started, I thought it would be really nice if our new director of the architecture program would welcome you all and say a few words. And then I'll introduce the reviewers and we'll get started. We're still waiting on 2 people who I've received word they're running late. And as we all know, traveling in the DC area when it rains is like traveling through 2 feet of snow other places in the world. And so I'm sure they got caught in traffic. So Mohammed.
Thanks so much. Hello. First, I want to thank all of you for being here. And I also want to congratulate all the students who will be presenting today and tomorrow. This is the milestone in your education. And those of you who were here for my job interview, you realize that I started from my master thesis because I believe that this is going to play a fundamental role in your individual journey. So congratulations for going through all this process. So we realize that it has been kind of a very challenging one. And I want to thank our reviewers, wonderful reviewers to be here, David, Brian, and Jamie for the pro thesis. And I also realize that, the work that you are doing is a result of all these years of work and what you have learned from your instructors and your peers and your mentors. So again, try to enjoy it, and congratulations to all of you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Very kind of you. So what I'd like to do is have the jurors introduce themselves and just say a few things about you. And so we'll start off with you, Chloe, and then we'll just go down the line.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chloe Hugh. I'm from HOK. I've been at HOK for 15 years, practiced as an architect for over 20 years. I'm a senior principal. A lot of the day-to-day work that I do is really organizing a team, designers, technical architects, consultants, engineers. And it's really exciting to be here today. I'm looking forward to hear about your work.
Thank you, Chloe. Mark?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Elliott. I'm an associate with David M. Schwartz Architects in Washington, D.C. I'm a graduate of this program. I Mark in 2013. Really excited to be back on this jury. Let's see the work I do. I'm a project manager with the firm. We do a lot of mixed-use multifamily projects, institutional work. I've been involved in several of our higher education projects, residential colleges at Vanderbilt University for the last many years. Really excited to see your work today. Thanks.
And Mark just reminded me that when he was a 4th-year student, I think, we got the new desks in the school. And I just want to tell you, Mark, that walking around earlier, I saw your name carved into the top. So I'll be by to pick up the $300 you owe the school for that effort. Damon.
Damon Shepard, also with HOK. I'm a principal and the regional leader of our science and technology practice. So in that role, we do a lot of work with higher education institutions, corporate life science clients, and government. And I've always been connected to higher ed. I taught at Howard for a few years in the architecture program, and I'm super happy to be here and appreciate being invited.
Thanks, Damon. And so we're going to get started with our first thesis presenter, Austin. I looked out just a moment ago and I couldn't find you, and I thought maybe you left. So I'm glad you didn't, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Professor Conrad. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Austin Benham. And today I'm going to be presenting to you the project titled The Nuclear Normal, which is a project that asks the question, how can architecture normalize the industrial processes of a nuclear power plant to better interface with the facility's surrounding context? To this, the thesis proposition will explore how architecture and site design can help normalize a nuclear power plant within its surrounding context. With nuclear being a possible solution to the need for non-intermittent sustainable energy, the facility will find its logical place within a community, thus shifting the paradigm of nuclear energy and challenging our current relationship with the technology. But before we get into things, I realize that some background is needed. So what is nuclear energy? Basically, it is energy that is produced by either fission or fusion, that is either by splitting an atom or ramming two together. For this project, we're going to be talking about fission energy, which is what is utilized. Fusion has not been refined quite yet. The device that will be used to harness this fission energy is a microreactor, which is prefabricated, easily transportable, and utilizes passive safety systems. So we'll get into more of that later on. But how does this all compare to traditional power plants, maybe that you and I have seen? They are dotted across the United States. Those are known as Generation 3 power plants. They're cumbersome mono-use facilities situated far from population centers and have large power outputs which feed entire regions. These facilities also lack any design past their utilitarian uses and are not accessible by the communities they service. The power plant that is proposed in this project is a Generation 4, which is drastically smaller and is, sorry, there's like a, is drastically smaller, scalable, modular, and service the direct cities and towns they reside near or within. This reactor and its corresponding complex will be located within Idaho due to the state's extensive past in the nuclear technological development, its existing infrastructure from this past, and its current leading status as research and academics within the nuclear industry. Additionally, Idaho has a growing population to support the benefits of a microreactor and possibly curb their dependency on natural gas. Idaho Falls is the city which the project will reside within. Located in southeast Idaho, this city sits far from areas of geological or climatic distress, making it a safe place to construct a power plant. Zooming into the city limits, the actual site sits to the northwest of the city, just north of the downtown area. Harping back to the state's impressive past within the nuclear industry, the Idaho National Laboratory sits just to the north of the site, which is responsible for developments within the industry, as well as the University of Idaho Branch Campus, which offers graduate programs in nuclear engineering. Both of these will be looked at to be interfaced with later. Important bordering features to the site include the Snake River, which starts to constrain it and offer planning opportunities. Additionally, the site sits at or near many major thoroughfares, which offer ease of access to the property. These also constrain the site, especially Fremont Avenue, which runs north-south, and then the elevated US Route 20 highway. So this is Fremont Avenue, and then US Route 20. Nearby railway corridors offer means of nuclear fuel delivery, with the main depot being adjacent to the downtown area. For the actual microreactor, the power output will be somewhere between 5 to 13 megawatts, enough to feed the entire city and its suburbs, and compares similarly to the 3 8-megawatt hydroelectric dams which power service some of the city currently. This reactor is thus right-sized to the population of 66,000 people of Idaho Falls. Zooming in further and looking at the use groups directly around the site, you begin to see a diverse collection of development, which include residential, commercial, institutional, research, and open spaces, all of which can potentially be interfaced with by the nuclear complex. Population density around this site shows that the residential areas are the densest and therefore offer the positive criteria of having the population serviced by the power plant nearby, thus cutting out the need for large electrical transmission facilities and other cumbersome infrastructure. As stated earlier, the Snake River constrains the site. This is seen through its projected floodplains, which encouraged some of the design's response. To the east, the elevated Route 20 highway, which was just covered a moment ago, runs past the site, with Fremont Avenue and the one railway corridor being the only underpasses. Between the river and the highway is Russ Freeman Park, which is a part of the city's green belt and starts as a large green space just to the north of the site, and then becomes a much more linear park space as it snakes down both sides of the site, both on the riverside and on the side of Fremont Avenue. A bit further north is the Idaho National Laboratory and University of Idaho, which have access to the site via Fremont Avenue or by the walking trails through the site or through the park. These elements create a pocket within the city and host a variety of use groups. The bordering features of the Snake River and US Route 20 make the southern portion of the site mostly secluded, with it becoming more permeable as you move north. Looking at the site directly, you get a better understanding of the other footpaths around the site, which allow people access from the bordering communities outside this implied pocket. The topography of the site is relatively flat, with maximum grade changes of 10 feet to 10 feet from point elevation to point elevation. It slopes down towards the river, and this topography is very representative of much of Idaho, with it being flat rolling hills with low-lying plant growth. Moving into the programming, the goal is to normalize nuclear power as safe, sustainable, and reliable. Establish interplay between the differing use groups which have access to the site, and highlight the ideas of discourse, transparency, and trust. To complete these objectives, the umbrella areas of public, research and academic, and the nuclear complex itself were brought in to explore the topics of this thesis. For public spatial uses, areas are created to foster learning opportunities and offer interactive areas for people to see the technology utilized on the site, while offering the opportunity to come across people who can speak on the topics of nuclear energy. For the research and academic areas, lab spaces are created to interface with the classes and topics discussed both at the Idaho National Laboratory and the University of Idaho. Listed here are some of the main topics which the labs can be utilized for. So things such as nuclear fuel processing, materials, radioactive waste, treatment and management, thermal behavior and measurement, nuclear systems design and modeling, and applications of nuclear process heat. I know those are kind of big phrases, but they're just some of the things that the labs could possibly be used for. The nuclear complex itself consists of areas that are needed to have proper operation. These include the reactor hall, the turbine hall, coolant and power facilities, as well as the control facilities. Just to give a quick summary, the reactor hall is what actually produces the power and heat that we'll be talking about. The turbine hall is what converts the steam generated by the reactor into actual usable power for the community. The coolant and power facilities are what supplies the cooling waters and distributes the power. And then the control facilities are there to basically monitor all aspects of those operations. Getting into the project's response to this, guidelines were created to address the site's conditions. Foremost is for the design to provide for the safe and effective operation of the nuclear power plant. This is seen as the reactor complex sits at the semi-secluded southern point of the site. Stemming from this, spaces are created with implied connections to the reactor complex, such as the berm, which snakes up the western edge of the site and connects then to the public and research buildings. The berm is a practical element as to block potential floodwaters, but also becomes architectonic as it acts as an extension of the buildings themselves, linking them and housing other infrastructure, which will be covered. Other guidelines are to preserve existing site circulation, such as the green belt paths on the riverside and also on the Fremont Avenue side, and to create buffers to adjacent thoroughfares, such as that elevated US Route 20 highway. And that's seen with using the access road that is used to actually access the power plant, as well as the HaHa site feature. And just to quickly elaborate onto what that is, I know it's a very strange term to hear. A HaHa is basically a sunken wall in the ground. You're going to hear that term once or twice more in this project, and you'll get a better understanding of it as I progress through the design. The public and research and academic buildings include important spaces such as classrooms, labs, a mock reactor to showcase the technology used within the actual nuclear plant, and a museum to put into context the complex past of nuclear power, all of which is centered around a courtyard to foster discourse between the differing use groups who will have access to the site. Stemming from this is also a shared auditorium which both public and academic entities can use. So, this being the mock reactor space, the museum, laboratories, classroom spaces, and the auditorium, which again is all centered around that central courtyard. You also get a sense of the berm and how that interacts with the buildings. Key areas such as the lobby entry between these buildings, seen here, and the nexus between the mock reactor and the museum create this mixing opportunity for the differing use groups for where people, again, can come across one another and create discourse on the topics of nuclear energy. These areas of discourse also include the courtyard itself. The lobby, being the first of these potential mingling experiences, offers views of what is to come within the courtyard and mock reactor spaces, as well as the veil of the nuclear power plant beyond. As one progresses from here into the courtyard, you begin to get a better understanding of the mock reactor and reactor complex beyond, while also coming across the native landscape which the power plant sits within, being pulled into the courtyard. The courtyard area is flanked by corresponding spaces which create dialogue with one another, such as the flex space, which offers learning opportunities, and the mock reactor being application of what was learned. Finally, arriving off the courtyard, one enters the cafe space, which is that nexus space that sits in the connector between the mock reactor and museum. From here, one is given the choice to proceed into either a space that highlights the past of nuclear energy or its present, both being important bookmarks to the topic. The two-story mock reactor space offers views out to the key areas of the nuclear power plant, while also showcasing a cross-section replica of the reactor used within the power plant. While the museum houses exhibit spaces which offer key areas at each display to look out to the power plant, thus putting into context the history of nuclear energy with the present technology seen on site. The second floor of the research and academic building offers double height spaces for the museum, mock reactor, and additional lab spaces, as well as the upper areas of the auditorium, which back up to the observation platform that sits atop the berm. This observation area atop the berm highlights the implied connection that the public domain shares with the power plant, while offering views into less vital parts of the facility, such as the turbine hall, which you can get a better understanding for right here. It should be known that, this people can obviously never actually access the power plant. You can have tours and stuff, but it's all about creating these implied connections. Visitors also get an understanding of the veil which wraps the reactor hall, showcasing this idea of transparency. The materiality of these buildings is a terracotta rain screen system. With its tight horizontal lines, terracotta represents the orderly uses within these buildings, while also having a color that is that of the native Idaho landscape. Terracotta louvers are used in front of glazed areas to share in the veil-like architecture of the power plant. The power plant is laid out in a way to maximize views of its functions, such as the turbine hall and that veil that wraps the actual reactor hall, wherever possible, while also optimizing its functionality as being an actual power plant. Again, double height spaces are needed for large equipment such as the reactor core and turbines, and then second floor space is also allocated for administrative areas and the control facilities. The plant includes aesthetically subdued security features as to not impose itself on the community. Main features of this include the berm and ha-ha sunken wall, which you get a better understanding for in this axonometric. Basically, one side of the wall is on grade and the other side is sunken down, so it preserves sight lines, but allows so there's no access to the actual plant. The public and academic buildings themselves create the northern boundary with a naturalized buffer between them and the power plant. Switching back briefly to the public and academic buildings, a water retention area sits between them and this naturalized buffer that was just touched on. This retention area holds stormwater runoff from the buildings. This water basin acts as a moderator between the publicly accessible domain and the more private power plant, which is also a symbolism as water also becomes a moderator within the actual nuclear reactor itself. Here you can see the veil and how it wraps the vital area of the reactor hall. Although people cannot directly see into the reactor hall, the shape of its containment building is seen through the veil, thus giving people an idea of what is happening within. This veil is made up of an aluminum screen suspended from the steel structure. Other parts of the plant incorporate a terracotta facade as to form a homogeneous architecture across all of the buildings on this campus. Other ways in which the plant can be normalized within the public eye past the means of architecture and programming include how the excess heat generated by the reactor is used. In traditional plants, this is just vented as steam into the atmosphere, but this facility uses this excess heat to both heat and cool the buildings by the use of absorption chillers. This is basically a district heating and cooling. The way, to put it simply, that an absorption chiller works without taking 20 minutes to explain is for colder months, it can actually just use the heated water that comes out of the power plant to heat the buildings via radiators. In the summertime is when it gets a little bit more complex, and that's when these absorption chillers are used. And the way an absorption chiller works is it basically takes the hot water and through a series of evaporation and other medium fluids, it cools it to a point where it can be used in chilled beams and actually used for air conditioning. On a larger scale, the heat from the power plant can be piped under streets and sidewalks in the adjacent communities and keep them ice-free in the colder months. Through architecture, programming, site design, and systems, this power plant interfaces itself within the established cityscape, keeping a balance between its engineered functionality while upholding its duty to be a multifaceted positive element to both the public and the environment it resides. The nuclear normal is atomic, designed in a way to expose the technology's inherent upsides and offer solutions to our growing need for sustainable energy. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions or comments that you may have.
I think in terms of the public circulation, I'm a little curious about how some of these public areas are not quite connected to one another. And another aspect of it, just starting from the public aspect, is you spend quite a lot of time looking at the urban design aspect of the site. How does this tell the rest of or affect the rest of the urban fabric? If there is a celebration point, there is a public facing aspect of it, does it connect to the rest of the urban fabric in that more direct, meaningful way?
Yeah, so the way that it was laid out, I guess I can go over here to the site plan. The way that it was laid out was most of the public facilities are located to the north, and they're pretty much like the first things up here. This kind of L-shaped bar houses most of the public facilities, and that's basically what you come across first as you enter the site, as well as after you park your car or by whatever mean you get here, maybe it's by bike. This lobby connector, basically this first bar is the public area, and it's the kind of the first thing you come across. So it's it's the public is first and foremost here, and then you have the research and academics, like the lab spaces and stuff that kind of sit off of it. This building kind of embracing, again, like the communities and also preserving views out to the river. This bar shape kind of acting more as a buffer to the busyness of the streets and stuff beyond.
I guess another way to look at it is why that point as the public facing, right? Can you access the site somewhere else? Does it seem different from somebody traveling down Snake River? Is there a certain focal point when one is on a highway or connected to the urban fabric below the highway in a meaningful way?
Yeah. So the main way to get onto the site is to the north, right here. There's also the northern point where this is just used for the access road for plant workers and vehicles to access the plant. There's other areas that you can actually access the site. So you have this preserved greenbelt path along the river, and actually stemming from that greenbelt path, you have this kind of promenade where people can, you don't necessarily have to go to the site to visit, the power plant and visit these facilities. You can simply just go there with your bike and use this as an access point to get onto the greenbelt. So there are other points where, yeah, you can access the site. It's fairly limited down here just because of the nature of the power plant. But as you come up, there are other pedestrian pathways and such that you can use to access. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for your presentation. I think this is a really important topic, this idea of normalizing the nuclear power. It's a really interesting idea of how do we get this to be more accepted by people living close to it. I think that's one of the main concerns, as I'm sure your research looked at that. So to the idea of getting this acceptance and people to feel like this is a safe technology, like you talked about how bringing people into this site is really important, and that normalization. I'm kind of struck by the site plan and this sort of no man's land between the power plant and the public-facing part of the building, the museum. Is there a safety concern about bringing people closer to the plant? Is there some sort of secure perimeter that needs to be maintained so that informed the site plan in that way? It just feels like it would be nice to go even further and bring people in. Have it been in any way feasible to get people really up close and seeing the inner workings of this to highlight its safety and all of the reasons why it should be normalized, but somehow seeing it so separated maybe suggests that, oh, this is dangerous, we have to keep you away. Could you elaborate more on those constraints?
Yeah, so it's the unique nature of that this isn't just any power plant, it's a nuclear power plant. And that's something that this project really grappled with, and the fact that because it is a nuclear power plant, you do have major safety and security concerns that you have to uphold. This area that you were talking about as what you called like a no man's land is kind of this naturalized area where there does still need to be some sort of separation between the actual power plant and the public domain. So that was kept to kind of just be this naturalized buffer for the power plant, but also kind of acts as this extension, kind of preserving the green belt and keeping it aesthetically pleasing. There was some exploration as to, maybe could there be like, boardwalks put out there where people can walk closer. Then, it's all a question of security. And that's really what it is. And it's mainly about creating these implied connections creating these implied connections that you feel like as though you do know what's going on, you do know the inner workings, but still keeping that distance and keeping it realistic for safety and security reasons.
Are there public paths, and there's a path along the river that's publicly accessible, is that right? So there's some sort of, like, it seems like you get closer to the plant when not visiting the museum, which seems a little odd, but is there something, a major security perimeter there that we're just not seeing between the public bike path, walking path along the river?
Yeah, and that's actually where that haha wall feature is that I spoke on. So this dark line that you see encircling the plant perimeter on like 3 sides is that sunken wall feature, as well as the berm itself. And obviously, if it was just a berm, people could just climb up on it and run across it. But it's this sunken wall feature at the footing of it that makes it that security feature. And to touch on your comment about the fact that you might get closer to the power plant if you're not actually visiting the museum and whatnot, that was done, again, so that, people may just drive past this on the highway. They may not actually even visit the site, but it's even just that visual connection that people have to it and just seeing it and knowing it's there that this project found very important. So even if you're just, a jogger or you're biking on the Greenbelt pathway, you're still aware of it being there. You're still able to see it.
So I first want to congratulate you on taking on a very challenging topic. I mean, I think this is never expected to sit on a thesis jury for a nuclear power plant. And I think you did a really thoughtful and effective job at articulating your ideas and, really coming to the table with some innovation. I want to say I love the veil concept, the idea that people can't necessarily experience the reactor directly, but that you're alluding to it through the architecture, I think is very, very strong. One thing I would ask about on the kind of academic building at the top is, did you give any thought to whether or not the courtyard was the right move versus more kind of flexible interior space, just given that it's Idaho and there's going to be a good chunk of the year where that space is probably not comfortable. Maybe consider whether or not some of that should have been interior space. And I don't know if that's something you thought about at all.
Yeah, so some of the interior space is flexible, and that's why some of it is like flex spaces that it could be a small breakout or it could be this larger lecture. You have the auditorium, which is pretty rigid, can only really be used for large spaces. But the idea was that if you notice, the courtyard really isn't full of a whole lot of stuff. And that was one thing that was really kind of grappled with was, how much do you program the courtyard? The courtyard right now in this iteration, basically, it's left to be not have a whole lot in it to kind of have that purity of just being this area of discourse where it could be used by any of the areas that sit off of it. So, on the summer months or when that courtyard can be used, those flex spaces could maybe could spill out into the courtyard. Or if you're, there in the cafe, whether you're a member of the public or you're a student or professional using the laboratory, and you get something to eat, you can spill out into that courtyard space. So really the flex space and the cafe in those areas almost act as an extension of the courtyard, or the courtyard acts as an extension of them. So even if the courtyard isn't accessible during these colder months or, whenever it's raining out, the spaces inside can still suffice.
I'm curious, do you have an engineering background? I mean, as you kind of went through some of the systems design, the fact that you were very thoughtful about an equipment-driven building like the reactor and thinking through how that works while still being respectful of the architecture is something I applaud you on, because being in science and tech, there's a lot of buildings that are equipment-driven that are just a box around the equipment. And I think that you showed a sensitivity to accommodating those functions and also respecting the architecture. So I applaud you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry to join late. I guess we can do introductions after, maybe again for me. Thank you, Michael. This is really impressive. It's a lot of work, and it's also a lot of technical kind of research and understanding. I'm not an expert in nuclear energy, but I do understand it's controversial, and the latest news is really promising. But I do have a question about where the waste is stored. And if you can explain that part, you probably already went over. Yeah.
So, and that's actually one of the biggest topics that people talk about. And that's one of the things that makes it controversial is that nuclear energy does produce solid waste. And that waste is with us forever, for thousands, millions of years. This reactor, since it is a fissile reactor, the nice thing about fusion, if anyone's been following the news recently, is that it doesn't produce any waste. Fission, on the other hand, still produces waste. The thing that makes a microreactor, the reactor proposed in this project, different than these large facilities, these large 1,000-megawatt facilities that we're used to seeing across the United States currently, is that these large facilities that are currently functioning, they have to keep they produce more waste than the microreactor just because it's a higher output, so there's more fuel in the core. And they have to be kept in they're called dry casks, on site, which are these giant cylinders about as tall as this great space on site, and they're basically stored there forever, indefinitely. Or it's put into wet storage where it's submerged underwater in a pool indefinitely. The nice thing about the microreactor is that none of that fuel is stored on site. So it would be transported either by truck or rail to a centralized facility, which with the hopes of, with the progression in technology, this fuel could either be permanently stored like it has been, or other means such as basically re-enriching it, which is basically they reactivate the spent fuel and it can be put back into a core and used again, just to keep, again, keeping it out of the waste stream. So that's the main difference, is that traditional plants keep the waste on site. This, you don't really have to allocate for that. That gets taken off site via truck or rail.
So that would be a component that you'd include in the museum, just to explain, because it's kind of a missing piece. I second a lot of the other reviewers' feedback on kind of getting closer to the reactor and that whole area. We have the buffer, but I feel like it would have been an interesting landscape exercise to look at how do you get as close as possible without being able to touch it. And that doesn't have to be like a tall fence or anything, right? It could be like a catwalk or some kind of other network. So I think seeing that connection between the museum and the kind of publicly accessible area and the actual hall would be maybe a next step. But yeah, I think that would be an interesting exploration. I think I really like terracotta, and I like the use of a more natural material to kind of clad around a very high-tech building. I think there's a lot of contrast there that's interesting. Another thing, kind of repeating what others have said, I like that you've taken a very utilitarian program and made it something to be celebrated, which is what we used to do with public facilities. They were celebrations of the public realm and treated as something to be proud of for a country. So I think that it is a really important architecture that we don't always celebrate. I have seen some projects lately of like central utility plants that do really kind of bring forward all of these things that you're a little bit is hidden here. Like I think the aluminum screen is a really neat thing because it reacts to the form of that, the circularity, and then you can repeat it on the site with the mock version of it, which I think is really neat, and it kind of creates the mirroring and some kind of repeating the language there. So I think that's really neat. I think the rain screen and the panel, maybe they could be, I mean, this is a huge project. I feel like I could get into these details, but I think I would want to zoom in on that a little bit more, just because I'm interested in how you clad a type of building like this and where utility meets facade. I think that's kind of another level. Overall, I think this is really, like I said, repeating what others have said, exciting project, and congratulations, it's a lot of work. So I think I can leave it there, open up the floor.
Thank you.
Thanks, Austin. It's really interesting work. I'm struck by this conundrum that you set out for yourself to engage, which is the idea that there is this reactor and this method of energy production. You want to bring people to it, but they can't get too close to it, right? And you're trying to mediate, like, the relationship of humans to this energy source that honestly we can't even conceive. It's so beyond our kind of understanding of it, right? And I'm trying to just think through the decisions you made around that provocation of getting close but not quite too close, and your role as an architect to sort of interpret or help to interpret the experience of that way of producing energy. And my thoughts go to a possible precedent, which is the museum at Lascaux. Do you know the cave paintings of Lascaux in France? These are paintings by very early humans, probably from 30 or 40,000 years ago. They're so precious, created with blood and other kind of oxide residue. It's very precious and very fragile. And humans, people, would visit this site quite often until it became clear that we were damaging these things, possibly beyond repair. And so the French government put a lot of money into a meticulous recreation of the Lascaux caves, which is set at the heart of a building by Snøhetta. And now you can go into a recreation of the caves and see, you know, painstaking recreation of these paintings by early humans. You can actually be in there with your body, putting your hand on the wall and getting a sense of the scale and the kind of majesty of, you know, this glimpse into our deep history, right? And it seems to me that you are grappling with a similar issue, right? You're trying to bring humans to a place, people, to a place to understand something beyond what we can conceive. Our mind reels, right? As we think about early humans, or we think about splitting atoms and whatever else is happening here and pushing atoms together. And so it seems to me you're on the verge of this idea of, you're teasing this idea of replica, right? You've got two C-shaped buildings, one to the south with the reactor in the center, and one to the north, a C-shaped building with a MAPP reactor in the center. And I'm curious about some choices you were making here around how you designed the MAPP reactor. What's the intention behind this whole northern complex feeling? Like, it's so similar to the south, but not quite. It's 20 feet off. Some parts are pumped up a little thicker. The MAPP reactor is 60%, 40% smaller than the other. Why the subtle differences? Like, what's guiding those decisions? And I also just want to hear a little bit more about this notion of your role as an architect, as an interpreter for the public of this process that we can't fathom. Right? You're showing us the reactor. You split it in half for us. Cool to see the cross section. But what about these other, like, inconceivable things, like the amount of waste, the scale of waste, right? Yes, it gets trucked off. But maybe this landscape in the middle is an opportunity to show us some of that scale that we can't comprehend, to help us understand this better, right? So anyway.
So to touch on your first question about the relationship of these two buildings, and that was one thing that this project really grappled with, was how similar do you make these two elements? Do you make them exact twins of one another, or do you kind of give each one its own architectonic form, which is what was done here. So the MAPP reactor, originally it was looked at to be almost like an identical twin of the actual reactor, where it had a domed roof. It was very similar to containment buildings that maybe you've seen on actual power plants, and really make it as realistic as possible. But it was chosen to kind of stand off on its own, let it be known that it is a MAPP reactor, that it, after all, it isn't an actual reactor. So that idea kind of went throughout these buildings, where you do have this two C-shaped buildings, and the proportions are slightly off, but ultimately they do share similar moments. You know, you have the idea of maybe a courtyard. You have these connector spaces similar to the connectors, like the cafe, and that thin area in between the public area and the auditorium. So they're just different enough to push across that people know that is the public and research and academic realm, and then that's the power plant. And then to, I guess, then talk about how, like, I guess what role the architecture of this project plays in. Could you rephrase that? Yeah.
This complex, this idea of energy production through the power, this, the workings of that plant. I see the possibility of your role as an interpreter, tell the story of that, no understanding of it, and aren't allowed to actually go to the artifact itself, right? So you're working with the analog and bringing your creativity and telling that story. So I guess I'm just curious about, mostly about how you design the MAPP reactor and your attitude about whether it goes to be an analog or not, what happens there. Yeah, those questions come up for me.
Okay.
Fantastic, very exciting project and fantastic presentation of it. Very eloquently presented. I really liked what Professor Esben was saying. I want to continue down that path. This aesthetic problem, which seems to have emerged, and a lot of people have commented on, of how you handle the reactor, which is the source of, it's kind of where the political controversy of nuclear energy, it hovers over that reactor in a sense, and how to change the thinking about it and actually make this a place people want to come close to. If you can't make it a cozy nuclear power plant, you can make it a sublime nuclear power plant. And so just that aesthetic concept coming from Edmund Burke of the sublime versus the beautiful, beautiful buildings are ones that are soft to the touch, round, small, anchored in human scale. But sublime buildings are also attractive in a completely different way by being large and kind of strong, and they might express the unfathomable, the kind of things that Professor Esben was talking about. I think of two power plant buildings. The Battersea Power Station in London has become kind of iconic because it has a kind of sublime look to it. It's huge and fortified looking, and the Hoover Dam. And I wondered if you could, if you've got, you could do some kind of framing with the reactor where you abandon the idea of getting close to it, but you create an experience for users that would be fun and cool and engaging by engaging that sublime sensibility. Just a thought.
Thank you for that.
We're actually getting close to the time. If we just have, can we go to 10 after?
It's extra time. Okay, I'll be brief. Austin, congratulations on bringing this to criticality. And when you set out in this project, that was always going to be the challenge and the dilemma, is how do you present this newly formatted form of energy generation to the public? And in a kind of convincing and reassuring way. I'm sure those aren't quite the right words to be using, but so there are a couple of things that I find a little bit ironic about I'm actually focusing on the reactor building and the turbine hall. The reactor itself is a compact reactor. Is it a pebble bed reactor? Yeah. So this issue of scale is extremely important. I really wish that you had actually drawn a section through the reactor in your section, right? So that we understand a little bit more about what's going on in there. But as such, the building that you have created expands the scale of the reactor itself, right? How close is that to an actual containment scale, the outer shell of your reactor building?
You're asking, like, if it was an actual power plant, how large? Mm-hmm.
does it approach the scale of a conventional containment building? You're talking about for a larger conventional nuclear power plant?
Yeah, so it's like many things, it's drastically smaller than a traditional power plant. It has the same circular shape that the containment buildings have. It's a lot less tall. So, traditional power plants, they could be, up to like 60, 90 feet tall, these containment buildings, because of the giant reactors that they house. This one is just kind of cut down and shorter as to not impose itself on the community. The reason why it's so large, a lot of that just comes from the actual functionality of the power plant itself, which is maybe something I didn't touch on. I guess a lot of that comes from back to the question of the fuel and the waste. So the reason why it is so large compared to the actual reactor core itself is within it you have this thing called a polar crane, which is a special type of crane that is utilized only in nuclear power plants. And it's a crane that can swivel 360 degrees around the roof of the power plant. And that's mostly for fuel loading and unloading. So that's why, that's a big reason as to why it is so large compared to the actual core. Yeah. I would say the actual reactor veil itself, not only because of that's kind of the centerpiece of the power plant, but also what I kind of tried to push across in the renderings is that not all the excess heat will be used or can possibly be used for district heating and cooling and stuff. You're still going to have some steam. So you also have this dramatic kind of backdrop to it of the steam being vented into the atmosphere, which again kind of just pushes across this idea that this is a nuclear power plant. Yes.
I guess, go ahead.
I had a question. Well, congratulations, first of all. I think it's cool to mix it up with something that's this controversial, potentially. Although it's been interesting this week, all the news about the fusion experiment, which would require probably not some, who knows what size it'll be eventually. But anyway, I'm really curious about the structure of the roof. So I'm looking at the section that you have of the reactor down here in the second panel. And there's a fair amount of distance between the shell of the ceiling and the outer shell of the roof. And then when I look at the diagram, it looks like these are very slender ribs. And when I see a building like this, I think of something like the B&O Railroad Museum, which was a roundhouse in Baltimore. And that thing is an amazing structure. It's a truss. It's got all this kind of tension and rings, but it's all made out of wood and rods and things. So what is it really? It looks like very thin ribs, and I'm curious if that's intentional.
So the idea behind the actual construction of the veil itself, which I guess is called out best in this axonometric, is the primary structure would be these large steel pieces that all hook into a central ring at the top, and that's the primary structure. But then you also have these horizontal rings that would act as the secondary structure and also keep like the aluminum screen taut. So the idea is like that there's layers to it. And I guess just to talk about the kind of what you said about how there's this large space between the actual containment building itself and the veil. One thing that this veil helps to express is the fact that one thing that a lot of these containment buildings are designed for is called defense in layers. And just to keep it brief, like if anything were to go wrong, the idea is that this building has multiple layers of fail safes just in case. So this veil kind of pushes across that idea of that there's layers to this thing, but you can also kind of see through that first layer and actually see the containment building itself.
So what holds up the inner layers then? Because they seem very slender also.
So this part that is angled, that has these two boxes on the top, would be a concrete shell. And then the dome that you're seeing within that concrete shell would be steel.
Well, thanks, Austin. So just to do some final words here, I really appreciate the task that you've taken on. And, part of this that's near and dear to my heart is this idea of essentially trying to normalize and beautify and make beautiful infrastructure. So much, in the 20th century and even beyond has been about essentially making things which are very utilitarian, not architecturally designed, usually put at the edge of town where nobody's going to see them, and really changing that paradigm where we're creating infrastructure, power, water, and things like that, which are meant to be a beautiful part of the urban context or the suburban context, I suppose, in this case. But, that I think is a really critical task that architects should be taking on as we move forward. How do we, as was noted earlier, in the 19th century, we celebrated our sort of our engineering, especially in things like wastewater treatment and power generation, and, getting back to that idea. And another thing that I appreciate, another trend which has been introduced is this idea that you could put these nuclear power plants buried underground, in the middle of the city, but again, invisible. And, I think part of your goal here that I think you've achieved is this idea of making it visible and yet still protected. And, we've talked about the various issues there. So I want to congratulate you on a great presentation, and I have a lovely parting gift for you. Here, hold that for a second. Let's see, it contains no fissile material, nuclear, not nuclear, 16 weeks without a meltdown. He got through the entire semester. And
Thank you. Thank you.
So with that, I expect every decent chair
Thank you. Thank you, sir. It's all set up and ready to go. Okay.
The right arrow makes it go forward and left arrow is back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, did I just go?
We can introduce David in this committee. David Moore is here with us this afternoon to be chair of Bruce Gabrielli. This committee members were Tanya Donsall and Maria Day Marshall and myself. David.
Good afternoon. My name is David Moore, and I'll be presenting Mended Community, where we're healing communities through design. So today I'll go over my thesis statement first, and my narrative, some site context and historical factors of the area, proposed development, and then the objectives from this development. The name of the development is Capitol Passage, by the way. So this thesis is dealing with the lack of resources in Capitol View, Washington, D.C. We're trying to bring more resources to the area, as well as dealing with affordable housing in the area. So the thesis is going to be 100% affordable mixed-use development with programs that help the community in three facets: the less fortunate, the community at large, and the residents that actually live in the development. This thesis is going to bring more density to the area, as well as more programs for the community, and economic well-being of the communities will be better through this design. So first, I want to talk about affordable housing. There's clearly a crisis going on around the world. Many people believe it's because of shortages of land, lending, labor, and materials. The UN basically said that it's 96,000 units that need to be affordable housing need to be made per day to help the 3 billion people by 2030. The summary of it all, the cost of housing has exceeded a lot of people's income. Going to the United States, it's still the same thing all throughout the country. As you can see through the map, there's also a disparity in ownership based off race. There are more white people and Hispanics than blacks that actually own homes, as well as during the 2021, rent is the #1 commodity that went up by 10% versus college education, food, and gas. When I researched about affordable housing, I looked at Pew Research Center, and they did a study through the United States asking them, do they believe that their community is suffering from affordable housing? And about 50% of the United States, or from their survey, believes that the community is suffering from and needs affordable housing. And they also asked them, do they think it's harder for this generation to get housing versus their parents, their grandparents' generation? And about 70% of them actually believe that is true as well. So these are some personas who would likely live here or want to live here. You have Dylan and Tiara, a young mom who wants her child to grow up somewhere safe, have programs, have resources to be able to raise her up right. You have Tori and Denard, recently engaged. They're looking to move out from their parents' house, look for some family-sized units, look for something that's near public transportation, and maybe somewhere near a fresh produce or a grocery store. And then you have Pernell, recently graduate from his university, starting his career. He wants to live somewhere where it's more modern and community-oriented, giving back to the community. And then you have Miss Charnay, who basically is downsizing, but she wants to keep something that's a little spacious so her family can come over near public transportation and has the ability to be near a medical facility. With that in fact, the 5 major things that we wanted to bring to this area is some type of retail, keep the fresh produce aspect, the health-wise, more multifamily, more density, the community space, allow the community to come to the community, enjoy it themselves, as well as healthcare. So the site currently has fresh produce on the site. It's an urban farm currently by UDC. They teach the community how to clean and use the vegetables that they grow, and they can take it for free at any point in time. Open market, this is Cross Street Market in Baltimore, bringing retail from local businesses to the area is really helpful for the community. Multifamily, bringing more modern style. A lot of the houses have been built in 1950s and below in the area, so bringing something more modern to the area. Allowing the community to be able to, even if they can't buy the vendor for the open market space, maybe be able to sell stuff like a flea market, which DC is really known for, and things of that nature. And then healthcare. Healthcare is important everywhere, so of course having affordable healthcare in the area would be great. To go over some site context, the site is located in DC. As you can see, a lot of the economic drivers are, where people work. They work at the Lincoln Memorial, White House, the Capitol, U.S. National Arboretum, and then some of the developments in the area, the Navy Yard, Hill East Development. The site's location is actually in Southeast DC. DC is separated in 4 quadrants. It's in Ward 7. A lot of the developments that I listed are actually across the Anacostia River versus my site, which is on the other side, is to the east of the site. So to give you some history of Capitol View, it actually was named the Priest Village. It was named after a developer who was African-American who bought a lot of the land there in the 1930s. It was developed by African-Americans for African-Americans using African-American architects, investors, and things of that nature. And at one point, it was named America's finest colored community. And then in 1938, it was changed to Capitol View. As infrastructure started to build, they realized they had a view to the Capitol from East Capitol Street, and they changed the name to Capitol View. During the 1950s, they started, DC Housing started to bring more public housing into the area. So you got Capitol Plaza 2, East Capitol Dwelling, and then 1955, they tried to integrate it with more, because it was predominantly African-American. They started integrating more whites and other races to the area. The problem with this is the two towers were basically like two cities. It was 300 units per tower. They couldn't keep up with the maintenance. It became crime-ridden, and they decided to demolish it in the late 1990s and the 2000s. And with that, they were able to get a HOPE 6 grant, which allowed them to revitalize the area with different type of public housing. So here, as you see through the satellite view, in 1989, you see the multiple towers. You see, oh, you can't see that, but the multiple towers in 1989 and the public housing across the 2- to 3-story buildings. 1999, this is when they realized that it was really crime-ridden. So most of the people across the street from the site moved out, and they started demolishing it. By 2005, it was a desolate area, and then 2010 is when they actually took down the towers and they finished construction of those rent-to-own townhomes for affordable rent. So this is the development across the street that is supposed to be developed in the area. It's trying to be a town center aspect where they're using a $31 million HOPE 6 grant to revitalize the area. It's going to bring affordable housing as well as retail and some office spaces and a restaurant on that corner. So as I said before, the site is currently used by University of District of Columbia as an urban garden. It's really great for the community. If you're driving on the street, you should come by and see it. So some of the demographics, Ward 7 has about 34% of the people that live there have children that live with them versus the 20% of DC overall. The median income is actually lower than the DC median income and the national average of the United States income. So the area is of need of affordable housing for the people that live there. So these are just showing, this diagram showing some of the main arteries that pass through the site. So it's a great site for a business because you're going to have foot traffic, you're going to have car traffic. It's going to be seen. A lot of people use that East Capitol Street or Central Avenue to go to work from DC or to Maryland. These are some local main connectors. Obviously, going to the west, you have Capitol Hill, Washington, DC. As you go to the south, you go more into town of Capitol Heights. It's a small city, a small town in Prince George's County. And then upward north, you have Marvin Gaye Recreation Center that was recently developed. And towards the east, you have Addison Plaza, which has some retail, but nothing really helpful to this community currently. The site has 2 metro stations within a mile of the site. You have Cap Heights, metro station, which is in Maryland, and you have Addison Road Station, which is in Maryland as well. The amenities around the site, there's mostly local stores like liquor stores, convenience stores, but there's no grocery stores necessarily in the area, but there are a lot of schools there. You have the transportation on the DC side at Benham Road Metro Station, which is 3 miles from the site. You have Capitol Heights Station, which is 100 feet from the site. And then you have Shrimp Boat, which is a historical location, and RFK Stadium down the street as well. So looking into the grocery store aspect, the development across the street is planning to bring a Walmart. I didn't want to compete with them by building another big supercenter, so maybe making something more open and affordable that supplements the Walmart is better for this area and for the community at large. Health-wise, I looked into how many hospitals, how many urgent cares were really in the area within 5 miles. As you can see, the outer rim, there's about 2, 3, but most people who live in that area don't have cars. They take public transportation, so it's hard for them to get there. And it's on the Maryland side, not the DC side. And when looking for hospitals, those are even further away. So it's a necessity of healthcare in this area. So for the proposed development, some of the precedents I looked at were Blackline Studio, just how this building, one facade might be similar to the context of the building that's around it, and then the back facade is something totally different, but you wouldn't know it until you turn the corner. I like that type of scheme. Judd and Wheeler, the idea of a connecting bridge, a pedestrian-friendly corridor between the building is something I think is not really used a lot in DC, but it's starting to become a thing. And I feel like this site being a gateway or town center would be really good for the site. And right down the street from University of Maryland, great precedent, the Southern Gateway with their tower, their retail at the bottom, and their use of residential above, and then their voice creating public space for the building. Another precedent for the site is transit-oriented development. I really wanted this site to be a transit-oriented development type of site, especially with DC wanting to develop within a mile of all public transportation. This site is perfect for it. And then the Clarendon and Noma is pretty much the same thing, a bigger scale, but same aspects that I would like to bring to the site. So when looking at the site, from the top view, we wanted to incorporate a gateway scheme coming from Maryland into DC. So mimicking that cutaway that the development across into my building allows for, one, a correlation with the development across the street and creating that scheme of a gateway. And if you're coming from DC to Maryland, why not have another gateway? Because that building across the street has another niche in it. So why not create the same thing? So now I have a gateway Maryland, and I have a gateway from Washington, D.C. Then from that, I just started building a building footprint, maximizing as much as I can. Then worrying about the arteries, passageways, connectorways from the street, and access point viewpoints from the other development. Then later on, realizing the access points and how they connect from our development to to the metro station, as well as to the restaurant in the far west. So when looking at the site, I realized I would have to do 2 sections because the middle is pretty much not a site for buildable on, and the building would be entirely too long. So with that, then creating density by increasing it and then creating that connection across with the development across the street. Then creating these voids that create that gateway, but also present an opportunity for public space for the building. Next, pushing and pulling with the facade or extruding some of the facades to give the facades of character, as well as a creative design. And then connecting the buildings by creating that bridgeway across that passageway. So here's the site plan. As you can see, that really red brick, we're trying to connect with the development across the street with our site, as well as make it pedestrian friendly from our site to their site. So for the program, it's about 65% of the building is residential, 11% of it is public space, which includes an urban garden, courtyards, and a community center. And then you have retail, which has a community kitchen, which will allow them to come learn how to cook and maybe prepare dinners and go home. Open market, and then a restaurant. And then we added the medical aspect, which is about 3% of the building with for urgent care and a clinic. And then 50% of it is for garage space. So if Tiara and Dylan is coming home, maybe from the metro, they will come from, and they're coming from the east, they will meet the open market space. And as they further go down the street, then they would see the community center. Tiara and Dylan can also, if they're driving down Southern Avenue, she can make a left and then she can go into the garage and park her car and then go into the building from that way as well. The lobby space is also on this floor, on the ground floor. As you further go up the street, because the street is on an incline, you then will meet the steps that allow you to go to the community garden, which is in the center right there. And then as you go up the steps, you are going to the open kitchen, which allows the community to come and learn how to cook or get meals. And as you further go down the west side of the street, then you have the restaurant, local restaurant, cuisine. And then as you continue to go down the street, there's another lobby space, so you can enter from there as well. You can put your car in, and then there's a garage entrance as well. And if you go to the most western portion of the site, this is where the clinic and the urgent care is, as well as another entrance space for the residential above that portion of the building. For the second level above that, on the western side, you have the garage space for that area. And on the eastern side, you have all the first floor of the residential. which have 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms, as well as a multi-space space for the community to be able to use, rent out, or have events there, as well as the residents. You have computer labs, and you have a gym for the residents to be able to use, as well as a viewing deck towards the far east. And on this floor, the residents have their own private urban garden that they can actually go to versus the community, so they can go out there and get their own herbs and vegetables. This is pretty much the typical floor plan. It's the bridge connection towards both sides. The left side of the western side of the building is a single loaded corridor and a double loaded corridor with all the same amenities besides the gym. There's a computer lab and a multi-space for people to use, as well as a courtyard in the inside, only for the residents. Here are some of the typical floor plans where Dylan and Tierra can either have a 1-bedroom or maybe a 2-bedroom, so Dylan can have her own room. And if Tierra gets married, or Tori and Denard, they want to have children, they get a 3-bedroom and they'll have a space for their kids. Here's a section showing some of the open market space, the garage, and then that kitchen area with the urban garden above, and then the residential above that. Long section showing some of the programs. This is more of the medical space, then the garage, the courtyard aspect, and then the residential alongside of that. This is as if you're coming from Marvin Gaye Park. This is what you would see as you progress down the street. You would see the Priest Market, that open market space, the garage, and then those viewing decks. If you were to go further down the street, you then would see this passageway up to the urban garden, as well as the community center. Once in the urban garden, you see people picking up fruit, learning how to grow fruit, as well as the garage space and the open kitchen on the far left of the image. And then this is the private residence courtyard area, urban garden, where they can just come out there and grab some spices for whatever thing they want to cook. Now, this is a viewpoint from the development into the area that I want to make like the hearth of the area, where the community can come together and actually love the area, as well as it having a ramp to connect the community that is behind, the houses that are behind it. They'll be able to use this area as a flea market on certain weekends, as well as other community events. This is the bridge connecting way. This is that inner garden courtyard area for the other side of the building, which also has plants, vertical plants, growing stuff as well. And then this is the western portion of the site where you see the urgent care, the clinic, and residential above. So these are the 4 things we really want this community to get from this development. One is community involvement. That's why it's so much community organization, community urban garden, for them to be able to actually feel involved in the community, proper planning, give them the ability to help their kids, help them prepare for the future. Growth. With all this resources, they should be able to grow better, be able to do more things that they weren't able to do before. And the community will love the design, love where they are, and love the community itself. This is a quote from one of the residents there. This is my Capitol View, the community that shaped my life, influenced my character, and I'm truly blessed for the experience. This ends my presentation. I'm ready for questions and comments. Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation, David. So I guess one of the first questions I would ask is, did you consider the impact of this new development on the homes immediately to the south of your site, and kind of how the two engage with one another?
Yes, I did think of that. This is why I created, does this work? This ramp area for the community here, right? Because right now it's just an embankment because it's like 20 feet higher, giving them the ability to, one, come and interact with the site, come to the resources versus walking down Southern Avenue or 58th Street here. That allowed the community to actually feel like they're welcome here versus it being a block or a drop that they're not allowed to come to. Other than that, we also gave them, instead of like coming up with a wall, I allowed them to be able to view into the urban garden so they can realize that, one, there's something here that you guys can possibly attain if you walk around the street or come down that ramp, and there's something here for everybody here.
And that's what I was kind of wondering with that, because that urban garden is the kind of residence of your buildings. And I'm kind of two minds there. I mean, one, I like the idea of the visual, but there may also be the perception of like, I see it, but I can't have it. I see it, but it's not for me, right? So I think there's that duality that you might have to, kind of be thoughtful of as you kind of develop that southern edge, so that you're not kind of putting a shiny ball in front of people that, they don't have access to. Then, the other question I had was, did you give any thought, particularly on the building to the east, kind of the S-shaped building? Did you look at that as possibly, maybe two smaller buildings as opposed to kind of the long serpentine building? Did you kind of study different concepts for how that can be organized?
Yes, I actually, because I'm dual major, real estate development as well, I was going to try to maximize as much. And I did that at first, and it just became a huge blocky thing that would be more towering and invasive to the area. So I try to open up the space more and play with the facade, so it's not like, oh, what is this huge brick building here?
Well, I guess I mean in the sense of not necessarily making it taller, but maybe having it be two distinct buildings, similar to how you have the other building to the west. Having it be like three buildings that maybe are a little more moderately sized, as opposed to the one on the right.
Yeah, I did suggest that I was shot down, because then it would be three separate buildings. So there's three different performers, three different aspects for my real estate side. So I have to have one continuous building. So this is what I came from that. Also, the question that you said about the shiny ball, it's kind of like, yeah, you can attain it, because all you have to do is walk around the street or walk down the hill, and then you'll be able to see that there's an urban garden that's strictly for the community. That's what this is showing here. So they have the ability to be able to get it.
So I really appreciated your analysis of the site history, showing what was there before, because it's sort of like a post-mortem of what didn't work, right? So I have two questions about that. One is, to what extent did that process of what didn't work inform your project? The second question is, I think at the end you said something new has been built, and I was wondering if you could just maybe indicate on the site plan, are those row houses the relatively new construction that was infilling that smaller site?
No, these row houses here were already there. It's actually these over here. These row houses here, as well as this senior citizen, affordable senior citizen home, was newly built. Everything else over here was demolished. The towers that were here were demolished. Just having it too big with too many affordable housing and not enough maintenance really deterred the great thing that they had there and made people move out and things of that nature. But with the mayor really wanting more affordable and transit-oriented development, this site can definitely be successful.
But maybe in terms of mass, what was there before and now here's what was there before?
Not really, because the ones that were there before were huge, large towers. If I can get to the image. There we go. Right here. They were like really huge towers. The only thing that really was an aspect that's the same is that right here, this passageway here, because when it's an embankment, it was supposed to be a way for them to be able to drive up and down. That's the only thing that dictated that I kept from the history.
Can you, I think you might have said this, but in case you didn't, what percentage of the housing here is considered affordable and by what definition?
It's 100%. Every unit in my building is affordable. 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. Every aspect of it is affordable. I'm just trying to give something back to the community.
Thank you, David, for the thorough presentation on the project. A couple points of clarification. Could you describe the grade on this site? I think I was struck by the perspective here that looks like there's a really steep incline on East Capitol Street. The way that relates to some of the terraces and the urban garden, having a little bit of trouble understanding that. And could you also walk through the ground floor plan and point out what parts of program are where without labels? It's a little hard for us to understand. If you could just go through that for us. Thanks.
So if you look right here at the site plan, each one of these contours are about 20 to 15 feet. So it's a pretty steep uphill climb up East Capitol Street all the way up here. And I don't have the image, but if I did, you would see this embankment is about 24 feet. So from the difference from this side of the site right here to this side of the site right here is about 40 feet. It's really steep. If you drive down the street, you see it. I'm sorry, what was the second? Oh, walk through the programs. So here is the open market space that I was talking about on the corner. And then you have the lobby space here for residents, the garage as you come in here through here. This is the ground level of that area where you can walk up the steps there. And then you have that community center. And as you walk up the steps, then you have that open kitchen area. This is just a supply closet for that area. And then the garage space here, which is, as you go up here, it goes along the slope of the building. From here. Oh, where does it start to slope? It starts to slope right here, right after the community center. It starts to go up. Correct, right there. Like when you first enter, this is below grade on the front side, but it's on grade on the back side. This side is higher. Yeah. And then as you go up the street, then you have that mom and pop restaurant idea or a local cuisine, the lobby space, another lobby space for here, the main lobby space. And over here you have the clinic area and urgent care and a coffee shop for, long nights and things of that nature for them, and another lobby space for this portion of the building. Yeah, that's what, yeah. Yeah, this one is above grade, but that one, it has a ramp to go up.
This is the slope of East Capitol Street going up 40 feet over the course of 100 feet. That just looks
like a massive. It's pretty steep. I might have moved it a little bit, but it's really a steep slope. If you go East Capitol Street, you see that if you go up it. I wish I had images, but yeah. Okay. Yeah, the step. We're going about 40 feet. The central, where you see Capitol Passage, there's actually an elevator shaft in there, and that way people can, wheelchairs, accessible, they can go up to the urban garden. I was going to do a ramp, but that's, construction-wise, it's extremely expensive, so I just went with the elevator, so at least they can be able to go up there. Right here. Yep, yes, sir. Right here. The community garden.
Yeah, and I guess, it being designed to have something, it's a very ceremonial looking stair.
Yeah.
But is it a stair that would ever get used, and are you better off not even having it, finding some other ways to kind of get people up to that level. That would be pretty impressive.
It's also an opportunity for tier.
Right.
Spread it out. And it could be a very recognizable, iconic gateway idea at the moment that is recognizable to the public as well as to the community.
So maybe don't try to be so efficient.
Yeah.
Understood, yeah. Sorry. Half brain. Yeah. I was thinking more of the same thing with like New York's pocket parks and things of that nature. You know, you don't know about it's there unless you walk down the street. So, and there's going to be plenty of people, obviously, when people live there, foot traffic and things of that nature. So it will be publicized, and the community actually has an association that sends out plenty of announcements. So I feel like it would be publicized enough that people will come.
Does it span? The stair, yeah.
You have a double height and then the garage.
Yeah. I think there's opportunity to maybe make it more useful to reach.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you for your presentation. I'm really interested in this subject. I was wondering if you had looked at some of the zoning requirements for this area, because what you would be required to do is provide PV and bicycle parking, for example. And I think those are really important components for affordability. From that standpoint, providing affordable power is a good opportunity. And yeah, energy efficiency and all of that really helps people just pay for basic needs. So I think I would have started with some zoning studies, not to let it limit you, but just to, a lot of it does come from a good place, even though when you work with it, it's tough. So I think, yeah, that's something that I would look into. Aside from that, it was a little difficult to follow the plan, although I think now I understand with the discussing of the grade that was a bit of a challenge. And I mean, what I like about the bridge is that could provide that kind of literally the bridge from the upper to the lower portion of the site if it became more publicly accessible. So I would have maybe pulled that out towards the street and lowered it so that it was part of the podium more so. Where you have your public amenities, which are very critical, like the community center and the healthcare provisions. So I think having that bridge be more part of the public is a good opportunity there. I think aside from that, again, it's like another really big and ambitious project. So I'm very impressed by the amount of work and research. And I hope you keep looking into it because there's a lot to this. And as you move forward, like I graduated maybe 10 years ago and I still do stuff that has to do with my thesis now. So I think it's good to take what you have and keep going with it in some way. And if you're going to do that, I would look into community land trusts as a model of ownership and affordability. I think that's a really great model if you're interested in affordable housing, and it's starting up in DC. So I would look at the Douglas Community Land Trust, for example, which is there in Southeast to kind of combat or prevent displacement, and that's all in response to that 11th Street Bridge project. So I think there's some good stuff to look forward to as you continue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. I really like your project, and I really appreciate the rigorous research that went to it. And upon hearing your double major background, it really explains a lot of the very compelling narrative of the why, the how. And one thing I'd like to piggyback on the zoning aspect of it is the FAR, so FAR of 1.8 and Maybe there could be also some variations in the height of the building to create certain gateway aspect variations from urban design standpoint. I like how the different courtyards and you've created or set it up for moments, right? The bridge, the monumental stairs, yes, they can be further developed, but they're set up for an iconic moment that can happen. So I think a lot of the ingredients are there, and this looks almost development ready. So, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Could you talk about where you would say the most iconic architectural moment is on the exterior? Maybe which of these perspectives you would say is the most identifiable image of the building that you focused most attention, and why, and what considerations went into the development of the exterior of that location?
Well, for perspective wise, obviously this community space approach was the one that I spent the most, even given signage as well as some signage that identifies it as DC, because if it wasn't there, you know what the Washington sign looks like, if you're local anyway. It shows the residents above, it shows that approach, it shows that you have that open market space, it shows the louvers that I created for basically giving a design aspect to the garage instead of just having punches. It also plays with light, that's why you can use that. That's why I used it on the bridge as well, because it plays with the light as you walk across, creating that experience, and then giving back to that community aspect again by doing the community center on the far right of the site as well. So just encompass community, this is for you, come here, enjoy it, things of that nature.
Okay, thanks. I guess I'm looking at the what I'll call the Flatiron corner of the site facing toward the metro station. To me, that part of the building seems like a place to make an architectural statement of some kind. And I think earlier on with your massing diagram, pointed out how you were thinking about the development across the street, and you pulled back along that corner. I can sort of see how it matches that rough footprint of the building across the street, although I think that's just the ground floor of the building across the street. I see that as an approach, but I wonder at this location, should you have your building take more presence of that corner? I'm not so sure about that it's necessary to pull back in relation to what the Walmart is doing across the street. Sometimes these Flatiron corners are great opportunities to hold the street edge and put some kind of mass all the way out to the street there. And so something about that perspective where we have the 2 or 3 story retail base and then the building sets back immediately above that doesn't quite have the impact I think that it might had you brought your building all the way out to that corner. Something else to consider there.
David, I want to applaud you for a really good job, and in particular, overcoming a lot of challenges that you personally experienced over the course of this project. And I feel, as you know, big empathy for those challenges since I went through at least one of them very similar to you very recently. I think you've done a great job basically working with 2 different sets of demands, the sets of demands from the RDev degree and the sets of demands from architecture. I have a question though, and I guess in my mind, I wonder if this building, particularly given the slope on the site, could have been a candidate to be broken up more into chunks that move up and down the site and allow for some variation in contour versus a kind of stretch building that goes across the site. I wonder if in a way, despite the good intentions, whether this building is just the horizontal built version of the tower, exactly, of the tower building from before. And I think some modulation on the facade and some breaking down the scale of the building into smaller chunks might achieve more of what you've been trying to do from the very start. But nonetheless, I think congratulations on a great job.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to take a minute to congratulate David on your accomplishments and thank the reviewers for your remarks and for his committee, Tanya and Brian, who are here, and Maria, who may be watching from afar. Thanks for all of your guidance. David, there's no denying that this was an ambitious undertaking. It's a massive site. It's very visible. It has so much potential as a gateway, as you've observed. And your mixed use ambition for it required a lot of study of different market catchments and different what's in the area in terms of amenities already. And so, I think that we've talked already about how you unearthed a lot of the history of the area, which informed your approach, both in terms of avoiding the past mistakes, but also correcting them, but also tapping into some of the community pride from the origins. I noticed the name of your market hall is the original name, which is cool, and just that you're challenging those histories in looking toward how to better serve a community that has a number of needs. And I think your insistence on serving their needs and treating people with love and respect is really commendable. And it's shone through really in every meeting that we had and every discussion that we had. I asked you the question about affordable housing because I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that you were going for 100%. It's not a token thing for you. It's this what this community deserves and needs, both. And of course, the analysis that you had to do was rigorous and thorough and detailed, more so than your typical architecture master's student. And so the realities of how do you build, how do you serve the current market, the current real estate development process, and how things are financed and still achieve your goals. So I think you learned a lot in that process. And I just want to say personally, David was always very collegial to work with, open to feedback, curious, interested, followed through on everything that we talked about, willing to try different approaches. And I think I just want to mention that, of course, what Brian said too, just the perseverance through some just massive personal challenges that, I don't know, just the poise and your dedication to your studies really impressed me. But it was impressed is the wrong word. It was just it was an honor to be a part of your process. And last thing I want to say is just that I think all of these approaches and habits that you develop through this will serve you well through your career. And I think your leadership and your work will continue to touch a lot of lives and improve places that, as you find them, make better communities. So congratulations.
Thank you.
So we're going to take a 5-minute break, if you would, while we spin the board for our last presentation. And she's smart. Restrooms are at the end. And on that side.
My mom and your up there just patting each other on the back.
Yeah, very. Yes,
I'm not sure about the women's room.
Apologies. And I want to convey Maria's message that it was a great presentation and she wished she could be here today, but she's watching you live from
So what's the thing? Thank you. Yeah, I know, right? Finally, I'm trying to get out of here. Thank you. Thank you so much.
the afternoon is by Nick Devella, and his committee was chaired by Jamie Tillman and Brian Kelly. So, Nick, take it away.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. My name is Nicholas DeBella, and this is Race to Sustain, redesigning Formula One tracks to build community through sustainability and interactive education. This thesis aims to take a Formula One track and create a stronger relationship between the sport, the community, and the environment. And before I get into it, I kind of want to give some background. So I have a very close relationship with racing. As you can see here, this is my actual helmet that I use on a weekly basis. I started racing at 14 or 15 and have been around it my whole life. And it's been a passion of mine and something that I couldn't wait to introduce into my architectural design. So here we are, and let's begin. So Formula One is the pinnacle of racing throughout the world and has become the fastest growing major sports league on the planet in terms of social media followers. With 49.1 million total social media followers, the cumulative TV audience for F1 races in 2021 reached over 1.5 billion viewers. With the release of the Netflix series Formula One Drive to Survive, its popularity has skyrocketed in the US. This increase in popularity has led to the addition of 2 new races in the US. In an age where companies and the built environment are moving towards becoming more sustainable, so is Formula One. The problem is they haven't reached their sustainability goals yet and have faced criticism and backlash from the drivers and the fans. In 2019, F1's carbon footprint was an estimated 256,551 tons of CO2. The MLB, NHL, NFL, and NBA generate around 122,000 tons of carbon dioxide over the course of a normal year from their travel alone. In comparison, Formula One creates around 71,000 tons, more than half of the other 4 sports combined. Most of Formula One's emissions come from the logistics of transporting their cars and equipment across the world, but almost a fifth of it comes from their facilities. Here you can see just how global Formula One is, red being the countries where current Formula One races are held, and the dark gray, countries that have previously hosted races. When it came to site selection, the Miami Grand Prix, which was one of the new races to take place in the US, held in Miami Gardens, provided the best opportunity to achieve the goals set out by this thesis. Its proximity to 2 major cities and its integration within the surrounding community provided a good base to work from. In 2021, the Hamilton Commission, a commission set up by Sir Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world F1 champion, to report on the representation of Black people in Formula One, reported that only 1% of people employed in Formula One were Black. Miami Gardens is a predominantly Black community, again providing a great opportunity to progress and grow the sport. In May 2022, the area outlined in red was the site of the first Miami Grand Prix. The race utilized the space surrounding the Hard Rock Stadium, including existing parking lots and roadways. The site is 241 acres and consists of a 3.36-mile racetrack built around the 750,000 square foot stadium. Most of the site is designated parking for spectators coming for one of the 8 NFL regular season games held at the Hard Rock Stadium. At 241 acres, the site is massive at just over a mile long. You can see how it compares to part of the National Mall located just south of Federal Triangle. The initial analysis of the site showed a disconnect between the site and the surrounding community. The surrounding roadways, canals, and parking lots form barriers around the site, not to mention a disconnect between the scale of the surrounding use, which is mostly residential neighborhoods, and the site. Here you see the stadium floating by itself as an island. The only sizable comparison to the stadium is the Walmart located just south, but that's only in plan. Site circulation became a major focus of this thesis. How do people move? How do cars move? How do you improve it? Right now, pedestrians must cross major roadways to get to the center of the site, and in some cases have to walk almost a mile. So, this thesis proposes a massive redesign of the site. Just over half of the existing site will be transformed into a new park for the daily use of the surrounding neighborhoods. The center section of the site will be transformed into a commercial area that will help draw more users to the site on regular days. The eastern portion will also be utilized for commercial, but with the addition of a hotel to house athletes, teams, and visiting spectators, so travel distances to and from the site is limited. Parking will be moved to the existing overflow lot on the south, as well as utilizing part of the massive Walmart lot. And the other overflow lot on the south will be reforested to give back green areas to the community. To navigate the massive site, this design proposes a people mover system to help circulate people and connect the residential community in the north with the one in the south via pedestrian bridges. The system is also known as an automated guideway transit system and is like any system found at most major airports. It has 7 stops and connects users with the major areas located around the site, including the parking structures to the south and all of the proposed additions. The system will have 2 to 3 trains that run every few minutes to get users around the site efficiently. And here you see what used to be an island now starts to become anchored into its surroundings. So this is the site on a typical day. Notice that the people mover does not stop or drop users directly off at the stadium. Instead, it drops them off at one of 2 permanent Formula One structures, a grandstand in the north and a paddock in the south, causing them to have to experience some of the site's Formula One functions before crossing another pedestrian bridge into the stadium. And here's the site on a race weekend with the addition of more grandstands and other non-permanent structures used to support the 85,000 people that will see the site per day on a typical 3-day race weekend. The site will rely on new parking structures to house visitors' cars on event days and non-event days, allowing for more green space across the site and more permeable surfaces in a place known for heavy rainfall. So you may have heard me use the word paddock and ask yourself, what's that? So a paddock in Formula One is basically the garage space used to house cars on race day. It's where teams set up shop to work on cars, make adjustments, and tire changes during pit stops. It is the home base of the team during the race weekend, and it also functions as an area for spectators to be close to the action, as the upper floors typically contain lounges and stadium seats for those privileged enough to get access. This building on the site will differ from typical paddocks in that it will have an integrated STEM and design learning center, as well as be able to double as a community gathering space. So, the Miami Grand Prix STEM and Design Paddock sits at the south end of the site, south of the stadium and north of 199th Street, just below one of the main straightaways on the track. The building stands out against the upward-reaching stadium by reaching out and seemingly moving along the tracks of the people mover. This view shows how a user might reapproach the building after an event at the stadium via the pedestrian bridge connector. The large overhanging roof resembles that of the stadium while still having its own form and ability to protect people from the elements. The people mover system is integrated into the southern facade where it makes a stop to allow passengers to exit. It passes underneath parts of the program that push and punch out, allowing for views of the surrounding community and the racetrack. The punched out program changes direction based on its level. On the north side of the facade, the 4th level punches out, facing down the track, while the 5th level faces up. The main portion of the facade is glass with a translucent red frit that helps block out some of the light while giving movement to the facade. On the glass of the east and west elevation, you see the origin point of the glass frit and the meeting point at the other end, mimicking the start and end of a Grand Prix. Here you really begin to see some of the program that starts to push out of the upper floors, lending to the views of the racing and creating a more dynamic facade. So the building program can be simplified into 3 main parts. The first is the plinth on the bottom, housing the garage spaces, spectator spaces, and the mechanical systems of the building. At the top of the plinth is the concourse, where people exit the people mover system. Above that is the STEM and Design Center, as well as some of the Formula One functions, including a media and broadcast center and the FIA and track operations. This is like the floating program, that it's slotted into the structure like parts on a car. The last part consists of the roof and the glass skin set over top of this floating program, like a valve cover on a cylinder head. So these are the 3 levels that make up the plinth. You can think of the plinth as the bottom end of a motor. meaning it's the bigger moving pieces, the rods, the engine block, and the crankshaft. Usually it's a lot simpler than the top end, but this is where most of the power comes from in a motor. The first level is made up of the garages with a loading bay to supply the rest of the building. Moving up to the second level is the stadium seating and lounges for spectators, allowing them to be as close to the action as possible. And that level is where most of the mechanical systems for the building are housed, and the third level consists of the concourse, which doubles as a community gathering space, market, etc., and also has a food service area. Here at the concourse, users get off the people mover and make their way through the building to the lounges, STEM, or the stadium, all while passing different displays of Formula One cars and memorabilia. On this level, users are also able to get glimpses beyond the ceiling at the STEM and F1 areas above them. The stadium seats above the garage are accessed by the private lounges or the public lounges. Both lounges have foldable glass wall systems that allow for the sounds and fresh air to filter into the building. While the typical spectator spaces of a typical paddock may be for the privileged few, this paddock offers a more public seating option that will be offered first to those in the surrounding community before being sold to the general fans. The last three levels of the building make up the rest of the Formula One program, the STEM and the Design Center, as well as the green roof. These levels can be thought of as the top end of the motor, the valve train, fuel injection, and the intake. And they're basically the parts that make the bottom end work efficiently. The remainder of the Formula One program includes the media broadcast center for the races and interviews with the drivers, and the FIA and track operations. And if you're wondering what the FIA is, it's the sanctioning body of Formula One, and it's their job to make judgment calls and uphold rulings during a race weekend. On the last level is the green roof. And there's a small track up there for people to use to get exercise and walk about. So it should be noted that the STEM and Design Center is not just a place for children to learn, but for anyone. The goal of the center is to get people interested in not only the sport, but the science and technologies and design that goes into a Formula One car. The labs were designed with a garage door so that they mimic the garages below and that you can actually get a full-sized F1 car brought into it, and they're brought in through freight elevators that are big enough to move them up. The glass skin allows visitors to be able to see the action around the building from almost any point. There is also wayfinding signage that allows for easier navigation through the building. Each building core is marked with a number that indicates what section of the building you are currently in. The cores in the building serve a few different functions. They house the stairs, the elevators. Some elevators are for passengers. Some elevators are larger and can carry passengers and cars. And then they also house the mechanical shafts. So when a user exits the people mover, they move laterally either to the stadium crossing the bridge, or they find their way to one of the cores and move up or down the building. As mentioned, some of the cores are able to take cars from the ground level to the top so that they may be used for different learning experiences or events. The STEM and design labs stack so that they may utilize the same venting for the exhaust hoods and other systems. The fifth-story STEM labs are almost triple height with a glass-framed roof, allowing for large items to be placed within them or different orientations of the cars. The primary building structure is exposed throughout the building, showing the user just how it works. The building consists of a 2-story reinforced steel plinth with 4-foot by 4-foot columns that span from the bottom level to the roof. The tall spanning columns are connected with similarly sized girders that are wrapped in a material to give them a tapered look. These columns and girders support the upper 2 floors of the roof. The elevated programs sit on top of these spans in the structural bay. You can see the regularity in the structure that guided much of the placement of the upper program. The 4 tall, solid structures are the circulation cores and are made up from 18-inch thick reinforced concrete that work to help anchor the long span structure. Like the structure, most of the mechanical systems are not hidden. They run from the second level of up the mechanical shafts in the building cores and out to each level. The program that leans out of the structure gives users a unique experience to see what's under them. In the STEM and design sections of the buildings, users can not only apply what they are learning, but imagine what their ideas and designs might look like on the track below. While a large portion of the facade faces south, the overhang works to block the harsh summer sun and allows for the building to remain cooler. During the winter, it lets in some more direct light. The building's large overhangs are also designed with PV arrays so that they may capture energy. The site could completely run off energy it created if the stadium adjacent to it were to adopt the same method for energy capture. Along with the vegetated green roof, there is also a rainwater capture system that utilizes the overhangs. The overhangs slope ever so slightly down so that the water may run into a gutter system that flows down one of the 4 mechanical shafts into a cistern below. While the building may remain stationary, the movement of the track on the north, the people mover on the south, and the users themselves combine to create an experience that resembles that of Formula One, dynamic and engaging. I would like to conclude this presentation by thanking my friends and family for their continued support throughout my journey, as well as the members of my cohort who have been there to offer ideas, support, and advice during this process. And thank you, Professor Tillman, who believed in me and this thesis even at times when I did not. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your critiques and comments.
Thank you for the presentation. It's a very interesting project. And I just told Nicholas that I've been binging Drive to Survive, so this is really fun. And I would like to circle back to some of the problem space that you've set out at the beginning about carbon footprint, about not having diversity in employment, and how is that related to the architecture solution?
Yeah, so it relates more to the program, and the programs is basically used, the STEM and design are 2 of like the most important things that kind of go into Formula One racing. Without like innovative thinking and like the understanding of like new technologies and how technologies work, you really wouldn't have Formula One. And so I think putting a center that kind of gets people interested, people of all ages, interested in that, to help them want to kind of go and possibly find a job in Formula One, whether it be as a driver or as a mechanic or an engineer, and then the surrounding neighborhoods are, I think, a great place to kind of bring Formula One to them and get them more interested. Does that answer? Okay. Yeah.
Can you tell me why the existing building is oriented that way? Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know why they built it in that. So the stadium was built in like the 70s or 80s, and then the roof structure was put on like 10 years ago. I don't know why it's oriented like that. I've questioned that myself. I can only assume that, the grid of the surrounding neighborhoods made the designers want to twist it so that it stands out a little more and isn't in line with that grid.
I'm assuming what I'm seeing around the perimeter of the site are kind of smaller residential communities. Yeah. Is there any concern about the noise associated with Formula One?
So actually, there was a lawsuit brought up before the Miami Grand Prix held this last May, and a judge threw it out. But there is some noise concern, but it's not as. I mean, the noise made from a Formula One race is that of like, a crowd at a football game. It's loud and can be obnoxious if you don't like race cars, but it's no different than, a crowd going wild during the Super Bowl.
Well, thanks, Nick. It was a very thorough presentation. A lot of great work went into this. I appreciated the urban analysis and the thought about connecting the site more to the surrounding community. And the people mover system is an interesting way to do that. Some pretty big capital costs involved in those, but I guess, you know, there's some arrangement with the stadium owner is on board with converting this. I mean, how much thought did you give to like what the actual real world scenario would be to convert, I guess, a still functioning NFL stadium into this Formula One track as well? Maybe you could address that. And then yeah, parking is interesting. Maybe you're sort of wiping all of the surface parking, it looks like. Did you, I guess this gets a little bit too, like, unfortunately, too real world, but did you calculate parking spaces before and after and make sure that garage number 4 can house the 100,000 people for the NFL game?
That's a great question. So to answer the parking, I did do the calculations, and basically it would have to be several parking structures. The buildings shown here are just more diagrammatic, showing that there would be parking there, and that would connect in with the people mover system. It would probably have to be several different buildings, assuming that, you know, the stadium holds 60,000 people. You need 1 car per every 4 people. You would need, it would probably be like the 3rd largest parking structure in the world. So spreading it out across a few different sites and having a few different buildings, but also, I mean, starting to utilize some public transportation to get there. There's a few bus routes that come from there, and I don't know anyone that goes to Florida wants to usually stay in like Miami Gardens. I would assume that they would stay in Miami or Fort Lauderdale and bus in. And then yeah, so I would assume it'd have to be through like the team owner and the Formula One itself. I mean, they did in fact hold a race here. And so there are some permanent structures. They paved the track over the entire site, 'cause some of the site is semi-permeable paving, and then the rest of it was just paved. But they do have an arrangement for the next 10 years to continue racing there.
So this is the actual track layout that has already been developed. Okay, so you didn't develop the track type, so you're just inserting the new building, the hotel, the other, okay, got it.
Continue. So you started off with the, well, maybe not the very beginning, but you mentioned the sustainability narrative, which you're linking to more so the programming. But I was wondering on that note, if you could speak to the materials that you're showing here.
Yeah, so, I mean, due to the conditions of part of the building being a garage, additionally, I was going to use like CLT or some sort of, you know, timber, mass timber to create this. But, you know, there are a lot of dangers when it comes to garage areas and, you know, the fuel that goes into these cars. It also got to the point where, you know, putting in so much program in the building got so high that the only things to use was, you know, steel and then concrete slabs. So I would like to think that, you know, all the steel, I mean, most of the steel used is recycled steel. And then obviously concrete's not the best, but.
Are there any precedents for Formula One buildings of this type? I mean, it sort of reminds me a bit of like a football, like kind of media tower with like some seating integrated with a lot of other sport facilities. Did you look at some of those, and are they of a scale like this, or would this be like an outlier in Formula One for a building associated with the track?
So this would definitely be an outlier. There are some interesting buildings, especially within Formula One. For the site itself, the Canadian Grand Prix, the paddock building is actually held within a park. And so during, you know, 99% of the year, it functions as a park with art installations. But for the size of the building, there's not much that compared to it. The US Grand Prix held in Austin, Texas, actually has some towers associated in with the design, but it's just meant for viewing. They're not they don't serve any other functions, and they're probably like 200 feet tall, but nothing the size of this building when it comes to a paddock.
So one thing I do really appreciate about the design is the overhang of the roof, and kind of how you were thoughtful about kind of shading against the the harsh sunlight that you be subjected to during the summer. Did you give any thought to, from a materiality standpoint, the prominence of that overhang? It's going to be probably one of the biggest things you'll see from the ground, right? So that probably wants to be explored as kind of a design foil against the kind of glass facade, and really starting to think about what that experience is as well. And I don't know if you thought about material beyond kind of the the glazed facade.
I did not think about the materiality exactly what it would be, but more of like what the patterning of it would look like and how it would be this kind of panelized system that kind of attaches to it. But also I would have to assume, or I would like to think that, that it's a very light colored thing, so it doesn't absorb a bunch of heat and contribute to the heat island effect, and that it's a very light colored material.
I actually have one quick question and two other questions. The first one is, how often do they race? I think you might have said that, so apologies if you did. Like, how many days out of the year? 3 days. 3 days a year, the racing.
Typical Formula One races. A typical Formula One race takes place Friday through Sunday. Practice on Friday, practice on Saturday, qualifying on Saturday, and then the race is on Sunday. But most tracks also get used more throughout the year. So typically, if we take, the Grand Prix in Austin, they race Formula One there, they race NASCAR there, they race, there's like 15 different series that race there, and then people can come and use it throughout. I don't think with this track it would be open to like the public to use, but you could also host, other races there.
Am I making this up, or did I see that I thought Formula One was looking at electric cars? I still have one more question too.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Formula One has came out and made the statement that they will never, ever use electric cars. They've moved to a biofuel, or they're moving to a biofuel over the next few years, but they have created a series called Formula E, and Formula E could also race here, but those are battery-powered cars.
Okay, so this is the real question. Although I'm just so interested in that because Baltimore had the Grand Prix a couple times. Of course, we went, and it was interesting. It's fun. I just feel like from what you said at the very outset about wanting to sort of correct the record or just sort of improve the environmental performance of Formula One as an entity, globally or what have you, or nationally, that the building itself needs, so I'm trying to sort of examine my own biases about this, about architecture as a model, architecture that teaches sustainability, et cetera. But just knowing you, I can't imagine you didn't think about this. So the energy use of a building that's all glass, even in a mild climate, just the energy input of the glass, like to make the glass. So I'm just curious about sort of like, what is the debt that you've incurred building this building? Not that you necessarily calculated that, and did you think about, even if you could generate all of the in-use energy for the building, which I wonder because cooling is going to be, I doubt if you'll need it passively heated because these are internally load-driven buildings anyway. So if you have sunlight coming in the winter and it's 70 degrees in Florida, et cetera. So like, how do you cool a building like this without contributing to climate change?
Yeah, so that's something that I've kind of wrestled with throughout this whole project. And, at certain points I kind of had to stop trying to figure certain things out. But I wanted the glass facade so that you know, someone passing down the street could both see the movement and all of within the building, and then also, you know, the users of the building can see what's going on around them. But to your point of, you know, the energy use of that, it is a little concerning. And I think that at another pass of this, you know, creating some sort of like passive ventilation system that kind of feeds in through the building, maybe at this plinth level, and utilizes the cores to kind of push air throughout would be a really great strategy. Or good.
I'm really intrigued by the section of the paddock because that's really the building that you chose to focus on. And it is a hybrid of different building types in a sense. I mean, on the one hand, with the people mover, it is a transit center in a sense. And then there is some research component associated to it. There's an S&T component, right? And I also feel like there could be an opportunity on the south side of this paddock structure to engage the community in a more of a community center, community-based activities that can be all year round. It's not just during race days. So that's something to think about, having this dual-faced paddock, one facing the track and one facing the community.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Really interesting. And I kind of like this idea of turning the track area into mostly park. And how you might, and I know you focused on the paddock, but kind of thinking about the broader design and also incorporating perhaps the paddock into that. Have you thought about the structural works of Nervi for stadiums? Because he comes, first of all, he has an approach towards affordability in construction, even though he builds these massive and exciting reinforced concrete buildings, is to use as little material as possible by making a streamlined, efficient structure. And he also develops these modular structural systems in section that pull that off with their streamlined shape. And the structural efficiency and his close analysis of the bending moments and stuff like that gives him these awesome shapes that then can be repeated. And if you kind of had a modular repeating element like that, you could use it for the paddock building, but also perhaps grace the track around the landscape and bring it out onto the landscape so that you could see it from afar. You could actually kind of mark that track. So there's value there in kind of coming up with a small module that solves the problem and then building it out, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I do just want to say, when it came to the structure of this building, I made the mistake of looking at, is it Calatrava? Yeah, I realized really quickly that I wasn't a structural engineer and I didn't have that ability, so I tried to tone it back a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the paddock building it's huge. I mean, how long is the building? 900 feet, okay. So that is a long facade. And so I see the way you're adding some interest to it through the fridding. I think that could be cool when it's executed. I hope it would look like that in the rendering. Look in real life the way it does in the rendering. It looks neat in the rendering. The projecting bays, is there it doesn't look like there's a particular rationale to where they are. On the one elevation, they're sort of stacked and then aligned. The other elevation, they're more stair-stepped. So that maybe doesn't quite, I don't quite understand what's going on there. And I just wonder if is there more that you could have explored to break down this 900-foot facade, and maybe with a structural module that related to a different shape that introduced something other than this straight, long 900-foot roof. I guess the roof itself is probably, what, over 1,000 feet long, is it overhang so far? Final comment, is the building taller than it needs to be? It looks like the floor-to-floor height is, do you know what the number is? And just along those lines, like, if it is taller than it needs to be, in terms of the cost to build it, the cost to heat and cool it, just something to keep in mind. Not overbuilding. Is that something that you considered?
I did a little bit, but in the end, I kind of had to go one way or the other, and I kind of overdid it. But the floor-to-floor heights on the first 2 levels are 16 feet, and then the concourse level has the highest floor-to-floor at 20 feet, and the other 2 are 18. But that was basically to house, you have massive structure that kind of holds up this building, and then you have basically rooms that kind of sit on top of that. And it was to be able to, give height to each space that people are in, especially within like the design labs and the STEM labs, so that you can, have the space to bring a car in there and work on it.
I don't think I mentioned this, but I really like your graphics presentation, and your overall presentation was really great. So just want to get that out there before I lose the mic. Another comment on the structure and the sections that we're all kind of focused on. It looks like with these, again, going back to the elevation and the bays, it's interesting because it's all glass, but at the same time, you're kind of emphasizing certain points in the glass by bringing people out into clear vision. But I mean, at the same time, I feel like they could have served another purpose with your passive ventilation. When I look at that section, it looks like they should be able to open from above and passively ventilate that way. And then in your other section, you've got the shaft for the OA or exhaust. It's exhausting. There's like a shaft coming up. Yeah, I think something like that is also very interesting because it creates, well, to me, I see sort of a double skin there, potentially. So you can create another sort of heat chimney. Just looking at like these opportunities, because your form is like I'm reading it in that way. So I think that it was kind of onto something, whether you knew it or not. It's working, or it has a lot of potential there. Another question, maybe the last thing I'll say is, what did you come across in terms of the like the hurricane winds and things like that? I know you're not a structural engineer, but when I see that cantilever and that height, I wonder.
Yeah, so the roof itself would probably need to be like tied down, which I didn't get to that point in the design quite yet. I looked mainly at, the structure of the roof on the building adjacent to it and tried to do something similar while not doing the exact. And they use, tall kind of steel towers that have cables that kind of hold that roof up. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you start off your presentation talking about community and trying to make a connection to the community. And I think your proposal is plausible and reasonable in a 20th century mobile-oriented, vehicle-oriented city, right? So I can well imagine that the people that live in the surrounding neighborhood would jump on to your site circulator and get to the building to participate in the activities that are in there for 363 days of the year, except for those 3 days when the race is going on. But then I'm trying to imagine what it's like to be inside your building. And it seems to me that the experience that I come closest to are the times when I couldn't make a connecting flight. And I was in an airport all night. And there are 60 people in a giant building and some maintenance people cleaning things. And it's a very uncomfortable, non-community experience. And so I'm wondering whether or not you gave that any thought and how you would break down the scale and experience so that the building pulsed to the different sizes of community. Did you consider that? How did you accommodate it? What did you do to make that happen?
So I did consider that, but it was something that got brought up later in the process, and that, you know, the concourse, you know, its name derives from that, of like the concourse of an airport, because, you know, that's what it felt like, and that's what I looked a lot at. But to your point about making the building pulse, I think that that would be a really great idea, in that, you know, having smaller sections that kind of work in between larger ones, you know, might work, especially on these upper levels. The problem that I was running into so much was the regularity of these bottom levels, and it made things feel so massive because they needed all that space for the garages at the bottom.
Yeah, I'm just saying, when I look at the sections, for the moment, if I don't see the exterior skin, which is what basically 900 foot long, very hermetically sealed things, that it just seems to me that that's not an inevitability. That I can accomplish what I think you do so well in this drawing down here, which is an elevation of your building next to the stadium. And I was captured by that drawing. And what captures me is that the stadium actually, when you don't look at it from above, is really an articulation of a bunch of different components, and that your building sits quite nicely next to those components, and it has a nice scale relationship. But that, to me, can be accomplished without taking the wrapper at that level. That could have been done through screens, through vertical devices, which you already are going to have in order to support glass that tall. There's another layer of structure that you're not showing, as well as the mullions, which you do show. And so it just seems to me that this thing, for a few times a year, the lower levels are intensely used. And that somehow I could have accommodated that. And that the fact that I have this big umbrella, that there could have been other things associated with the STEM area that were outside areas. I mean, I appreciate that the focus of the STEM is primarily on education and the connection between engineering, Formula One racing, and the community that the building is in. But there are other aspects, you know, that could be explored that are also part of STEM that maybe could have been outside. I'm struggling with what you start off with as a sustainability problem. And then the solution seems too freaking simple. My mind. Although what I'm thinking about, obviously, I have to but I think many of the same aesthetic issues could come. I have a big mouth.
Yeah, I think those are excellent points. One of the things that you've accomplished is to frame a question about the future in this project. by creating the people mover and looking at the site holistically as a place where many different things might take place. I could imagine that this building could be activated by other programs and other activities if you look at this site in a holistic way over the course of a year. So, you know, fair enough that you presented this, you framed this in terms of the STEM program that is kind of a connection, as you have articulated it, between the community and the project. But the fact of the matter is that you've got, you know, how many NFL games and other things that are taking place here, which bring massive amounts of people to this site. And so the project could be framed almost in terms of a kind of infrastructure for a whole range of activities. And, you know, in the scope of this thesis, you probably didn't, you know, you weren't able to go into sort of any great detail about what you thought the other programs might be on this site. But this is a massive site that brings 20,000 volts of population in here, you know, on a fairly regular basis. So I guess I'm an optimist here. I could see the building being animated by a number of different programs if you look at the site from a holistic standpoint, and the fact that you created a people mover, right? So.
Raises some issues about aesthetics and the relationship between aesthetics and engineering. And what I appreciate about your project, and what I think you did very well, is you looked at efficiencies at a macro scale, like how we're going to move people, vast numbers of people around in a very short amount of time. And I think the people mover was a really good resolution on your part. But when I look at Formula One cars, right? So they all have access to the same engineering models. They all are, they have different engines, but they move them. But in the end of the day, it's not engineering that separates them, right? That's why you can tell a Ferrari from a McLaren, right? It's not just engineering. There's an aesthetic quality that seeps into their decision making. They meaning the broadcasters, like to dupe us as the public to think that every rivet, every bolt, everything that's done on these cars is all a consequence of engineering efficiency and analysis. But it's not true, right? Otherwise, all spaceships would look the same, and they don't, and et cetera. And so how did you consider that cultural dimension? How does that enter into the aesthetic decisions that you made in your building? Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, okay. I gotta think for a second. Yeah, so I mean, when it came to the aesthetics, a lot of what I looked at was actually futurist Italian art. And so I tried to make, you know, these gestures more within the exterior of the building to kind of reflect that artwork that, you know, there's a lot of repetition. There's, you know, verticals that are crossed with horizontals, and trying to, you know, create that dynamic in the exterior. And I think that kind of could have been brought a little bit more onto the inside and done a little bit better, because the inside starts to be, you know, more regular without some of those kind of aesthetics. But
The reason I ask is in my mind and in my experience, the mediated world of media actually captures our attention at baseball and football games more than the spectacle that we're there to see. Right? And I'm always curious about that, right? I mean, this happens in my own experience with my wife, right? We go to a restaurant and I want to be 100% there for her. And yet I can't help myself and I end up looking at the TV over the bar, even though I want to pay attention to her 100%, because that media world is like, TV there. But it's because of the flickering and the shiny object quality. And I would imagine that as we pursue this design more, that media would start to present itself in the lounges and those kinds of areas. And so what I'm curious about is that mediated world and how it's affecting our aesthetic sensibilities and what that means for architecture. And whether or not architecture inevitably will succumb to it and will be like labor, where our buildings would just be scaffold for 20-story mediated vestiges. And I struggle with this, and I don't know the answer, and so I'm asking you how you struggle with it, so that you can teach.
There are some sports that media doesn't capture well. So hockey, for one, is just too fast. And I'm wondering, I've never done this before. I'm just trying to imagine what it might be like to be at one of these things. Within your whole tunnel of vision, there's all kinds of stuff going on all over the track, because what happens is the camera will catch this curve, and that straightaway, and this curve. And there might be moments where you don't see anything going on. I don't know, there might be other moments where you see lots of stuff going on, shifting back and forth between media. Hockey, for me, I would never watch it on TV. I think it's silly. But when you go and actually watch it, it's like all engaging, because you can see the whole thing happening right there. See the high stick. Or football, which is totally a planned sport. There's that fantastic Bears game where the field got, here I'm talking sports, never earlier did this, where the fog bank came in and
the Eagles.
and the cameras had to go down to the field, and it was like there was nothing to show, because it's a planned game.
Well, but it's also highly mediated.
Yeah.
As I would imagine this is too, right?
Yeah.
Because you can only see a snippet, right? The
Yeah.
cars are.
Is it time?
Oh,
it's time.
You lost track of the time? That's a good sign.
Brian and I were having a conversation.
Should we wrap it up? Shall we? Okay. Nick, so well, the last bit of that conversation is still resonating in my mind, and I think you should be delighted that that was a part of the conversation. And on a personal note, I think that's a very, very heavy and interesting question. The status of space and spatiality in the early 21st century, in the context of certain technologies, AR, VR, and immersive environments, not only the media. So when you talk about the media, I begin to immediately think about other forms of immersive environments, which we had talked about a bit in this project, being part of the STEM experience and part of immersing people in the experience of race car driving without having to assume the risk of that. So just to recap, the project has opened up an inquiry on a number of different different levels. The building, the status of the building as a vessel for activity, the systems embodied in the building, the relationship of technology, in this case, a specific type of technology, to architecture, to the language of architecture. The relationship of this facility to the community potentially and to the educational environment. So in sum, there are so many great foundations for you to take forward in your career. And I can't remember when this was said earlier, but somebody said, well, you know, actually I graduated from school 10 years ago and my thesis continues to be relevant. I will say on a personal level, I graduated from school more than 10 years ago, and my thesis is absolutely relevant to what I think about and do today, and that's why I think we do believe so much in this process. But Nick, you never didn't believe in your project, okay? You are deeply invested in thinking about this activity, and I think this as a manifestation of your commitment to your professional development, to thinking about the role of technology in building. You've opened up so many wonderful questions. I also like to thank the committee, David and Brian, who are wonderful colleagues and sort of discussing this project as we went forward. But Nick, congratulations to you. Carry all of this forward with you, and do be safe on the racetrack. Thank you.
I just want to remind